Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
Selling in a slow market. We obviously, during coronavirus right now, it can be a much more challenging time to sell. There are a lot of buyers sitting on the sidelines right now. Even though inventory is low, it's definitely a different environment out there when listing a home. And it is pretty common to slow markets that we've been through. So just wanted to kind of touch on setting seller expectations early going into a new listing during this time, during any slow market that happens in the future or has happened in the past. Just kind of setting yourself, your business, and your clients up for success in a time like this. The market is different. There are more deals falling apart than in typical spring markets. I think patience is key. I think being extremely open going into a listing is important, and preparing clients that, that first offer that you get may not be the one that makes it all the way to the finish line.
Yes, more commonly so now than before as well.
For sure. Even in busy markets, I think it's important to point out that, once an offer is accepted, it is not always, subjects are not always removed. It does not always get to a firm deal. And I'd say even in busy markets, what's that percentage? Probably 70% of accepted offers make it to the finish line.
If they have subjects, but also add that in busy markets, there's more offers that don't have subjects, so they make it to the finish line right away. But that shifts right away. There's a market there's a subject market and a no subject market. I would say, and we should acknowledge, it is a slower market than the streak we had from 2016 to say early 2018. We were experiencing some busyness prior to this, COVID pandemic. So I guess the unique thing about this, I'd say, well, we can call it a slower market, is it's a slower market with less supply, but also less demand. So it's kind of like a balanced slow market in a way. There's just less transactions going on. Yeah. For a lot of product. So we're kind of experiencing some products having great success and not having any slowdown, whereas other products are, deal after deal falls apart, or they're the wrong product for the wrong time and experiencing nothing. But Denny, you've seen more collapsed accepted offers in the last month than you've seen in the previous 6. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that stat, but that's probably true. There's been a lot. And for sellers, it's frustrating if that expectation is not at least talked about early, just that the potential of a collapse deal or multiple collapse deals on your property is, a realistic expectation at this point. I think you're probably right. There's been, for us, even in the last week, there's been 4 or 5 maybe. So they add up. I think it can be really frustrating for a seller, especially if they're not expecting it, or, some sellers haven't bought or sold a home in years, or maybe this is their first sale and they're assuming that an accepted offer means it's pretty much a done deal. So I think having those conversations early and just being able to accurately summarize what type of environment we are in right now going into a listing, educating them that, in a slow market like this, it might be 50 to 60% of accepted offers actually make it to the finish line. So when they hear those numbers, half. So their first accepted offer may be that one that is on the other side of the half that doesn't make it all the way. And when they're asked to reduce the price significantly because of inspection items, or a buyer can't get financing because banks are tightening up lending, or, in the last month and a half, a lot of people have been laid off. So we had one deal that had an accepted offer, and during the due diligence period, the buyer unfortunately was laid off from his job. So obviously the bank wouldn't give them as much money anymore, and obviously they were not able to remove subjects. So those types of experiences can be really, really frustrating for sellers if they don't know that it's a possibility. So I think the important thing in markets like this is just over communicating and helping clients understand what type of environment we're in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So aside from going into some of the reasons why we're seeing, buyers not remove subjects and the different ones, I think it would be helpful for some of the people listening to just kind of chat about some of the conversations or some of the things we're chatting about with sellers to set up those expectations right from the start. So, when we're thinking of that initial meeting with the seller, seller wants, say, $1 million. That was the peak price for their place. So they're seeing the highest sale price that took place, and it's called a suburb market where that's a little bit ambitious right now. What's the conversation look like with them when you have a seller that has a little bit of a yesterday's price expectation?
It can be challenging. I think obviously experience comes into play here, just talking about what you've seen across all markets in the last few months. So the difficult thing about price point right now is that there isn't a ton of sales data during this pandemic to show what is accurately a value for their home. So we're going back in time a little bit. We're talking about January, February, early March sales data. We're talking about 2019 data, which it seems like we are fairly in line with 2019 prices right now for homes that are selling in the last month and a half, versus we saw a little bit of a increase in the early part of the year. So I think really just being open that there isn't a lot of sales going on right now, although good product is selling still fairly quickly, and giving them ranges. So what I like to do in listing appointments, talking about price point specifically, is give ranges and potential expectations for those ranges. So if this person wants $1 million and that was a price that maybe was achievable in 2017, but the neighborhood hasn't seen in the last 2 years, I'm talking about what is the expectation if you list at $1 million or $999, approximately how many showings are we going to have per week? How long do we think we're going to be on market? The likelihood of getting an offer in those first few weeks is quite a bit lower. And if you do get an offer, be prepared that it's not going to be list price. They're going to be negotiating. Whereas if we're listing at, $950, maybe that's more of a reasonable price for this specific home. I think our showings will be more. Maybe we'll have 6 to 8 showings in the first week versus 2 to 4. If we're listing quite a bit higher, the likelihood of getting an offer is quite a bit higher. Versus like our suggested price where, something has recently sold, let's say $899 for that specific home. If we're listing in this number, it depends so much on a client's motivation. If they, are planning a move, they have something lined up that they'd like to buy, or they're, whatever it may be, and they're a little bit more motivated, just explaining that, look, your goal is to sell in the next, let's say 2 to 4 weeks, because you have this place lined up that you want to go. The realistic price point based on here are the sales in your neighborhood is $899. I think at this price point, we're going to have 8 to 10 showings in the first week. And I think the likelihood of getting an offer in those first 2 weeks is quite good. So for me, it's not necessarily, this is the value of your home. It's here's what to expect at different ranges.
And it's also acknowledging that the data in the last, say, month or 6 weeks has been, it's hard to go off that data because it's so thin. Like there's so little, the sample size is small. So, I think we should kind of acknowledge that we've had some recent sales that have been at peak pricing. So there's some places out there and product types that are experiencing the highest prices they've ever experienced or in line with them. And then there's others that are off 20%. So it's kind of, when there's low supply and lower demand. I mean, the stats came out yesterday. It kind of validated that, but it seems like it's proportionate. But when there's low supply and there's low demand, it's hard to really trust the data. because there could just be that one listing that popped up and that one buyer that really wanted it. And we've seen a couple lucky sales this year that would not repeat themselves. So it's hard to use those lucky sales, setting up the expectation that we're going to achieve them again. And then alternatively, on the suppressed side, there's certain products that are just like, I keep pointing back to, say, luxury suburb homes. If you have a $3 million Tri-Cities home or New West or Burnaby home, that market is very slow right now. And if you're a seller and you're listing your product right now, I would just be basically saying, the data, like those types of products, the sales ratio is quite low. There's a lot of different markets in Vancouver, but that particular luxury suburb market is not the right time at this point in time to try to get yesterday's price. Mm-hmm. If I go to Burnaby, for example, and say an area like Buckingham Heights, we're still arguably 30% off of their peak pricing in some of those areas. And yet you still see these listings trickle in at those inflated price points. And there's no data to back that up in the last year, So I think when we're acknowledging the market here from a seller side, we should just acknowledge that there's a lot of little mini markets within Vancouver. And when you're having a 2-bedroom, condo conversation that's along the SkyTrain versus a $3 million Buckingham Heights home, it's a very different conversation. Mm-hmm. And for the condo one, they have a chance of getting lucky. So yes, if they price it high, which we have done recently, sometimes it works out. But we just don't want to offer any confidence to the seller that it's going to work out, because oftentimes these people are buying and selling at the same time, and if we inflate their expectations on the sale when they're paying top dollar for a buy, that's a dangerous position to be in. And I think that particular scenario right now is a scary one. So if when you're in this COVID market where the supply is low, the demand's low, and you want to buy and sell in this market, if you're buying and you're buying something that's selling at peak pricing and you're anticipating the same experience on the sell of your place, that's where I think it's really important to have a more conservative expectation as a seller.
For sure. I think it's really important to be patient. And so the whole transaction of buying and selling at the same time right now is challenging, just because there really is not, it's difficult to set an expectation of how long a specific property is going to be on market. I'll give a couple examples. And I think just like being open that we don't know if it's going to sell week one or if it's going to be on market for 2 months. It's just, it's a strange time. And buyers are, I don't know if I've ever seen a time where buyers are more sensitive than right now. They're already sensitive because they don't fully understand what is going on with this pandemic. They don't fully understand how it's going to affect the economy or even their own lives specifically. A lot of them that work for big companies don't know if there's going to be more layoffs coming down the road because the economy's been hit. They don't know how, the declining stock market, how is that going to translate over to real estate? How is, unemployment going up going to translate into Greater Vancouver real estate? So they're already sensitive going in. So once an accepted offer is accepted, I would say to most clients, be prepared that the buyer may ask you for something in that due diligence period after doing an inspection. And we've had this happen multiple times in the last week, is single family homes, especially older homes. We're trying to do as good a job educating buyers as they're coming through the home, saying, home was built in 1965. It's an older home. Yes, they've done a renovation to this specific area of the home, but it's the original electrical wiring. It's the original plumbing for the most part in the home. They haven't done any drainage work, and the roof's about 15 years old. So trying to educate buyers on things that could come up in a home inspection, I think is really important. But at the same time, even if a buyer is prepared that, okay, yeah, it's an older home, I understand there's some maintenance involved. After seeing that home inspection and just kind of working out the math of saying, okay, the roof is 15 years old, I need to replace it in 5 years. It's going to cost me 10 grand. Here, there's a lot of older wiring. If I have to do all of that, it's going to cost me 15 grand, whatever. because they're already sensitive going in, and it seems like more and more of them lately are choosing to just walk away because it's uncomfortable, because that, sensitivity level is just exaggerated already going into the offer, that one little thing kind of, and not that these are little things, but maintenance that is pretty common in 1950s, 60s homes, very common. And I'm sure their agents are doing a good job of educating them on, yes, okay, based on your budget, we're going to be buying an older home. These are some things that could come up in the next 5 to 10 years as you're living there. But those, just seeing that written down in a home inspection is scaring people off.
And when the buyers are buying a place at a time where there's a lot of uncertainty, they're more likely to have that need for that second ask. So, it's just kind of human behavior. In the negotiation, they're nervous, but they're not fully committed yet because they're subjects. So, the goal is to just get to the best outcome and hopefully agree on a price. But once they agree on a price, they're more likely to run into some media headlines. I saw one the other day just titled "Real Estate Recession." There was no data behind it. It was just a conversation on local news about it. And there was nothing there for the products we sell. There's no indication of that yet, but they had that titled in the media. So if you're in the buyer's shoes and you're seeing what's going on in the world and you got an accepted offer and you have a week to make that decision and those headlines start hitting you and you, you're particularly, say in a lot of circumstances, you're aware that the seller doesn't have another option. You're the only option at that point in time. When you feel that you're the only option at that point in time, you're buying this time and you're seeing those headlines, it's human nature to have that need for that second ask to make you feel better about your deal. Whether it's a small item or a big one, just renegotiating it is more common when you're nervous. And if you get something, you feel better about it. And so from a seller standpoint, it's good to have a little bit of a reserve or an expectation that you might have to give away a little more to make the buyer feel good about it. But that's just kind of the market we're in. And the difference between this market and, say, a busier one is, in a busier market, if the buyer starts renegotiating at the end, well, if that was 2017, we would say, don't buy it. We're going to put it back on the market, get another bidding war, and go subject free this time. It's the position. It's from a seller side. In a busy market, you have options. And right now, if you're a seller, it's great to have a backup offer. That will facilitate that first offer being less needy. So if you can get a backup offer, definitely get that backup offer right now. But if you don't have that backup offer, be prepared to give the buyer a little win if they want to renegotiate prior to subject removal, just to get the deal done. And you don't have to, of course, but those small gestures can go a long way. What are your thoughts on the give the buyer a win at this time? Obviously it's case by case dependent, but it seems to apply more now than it did before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to prepare sellers for that early on in the listing, right? So that's a conversation that I have before we're even on market, is be prepared. In these markets, there may be a renegotiation after the accepted offer due to inspection items. You live in a 1965 home. It's an older home. Yes, we've done some updates to the kitchen or bathroom, but the electrical, the plumbing, the furnace is original. The roof is nearing the end of its life. Be prepared that a buyer may ask you for something after the accepted offer. So the goal of any seller is to sell the home. And I think it depends on what is the ask from the buyer afterwards and what is your goal. Is your goal to, downsize or upsize? Is there a home available that you have an accepted offer on or that you want to buy? Is giving someone $5,000 so that we can get them across the finish line going to help you achieve your goal? Then, I think this is part of the reality of any slower market, regardless of whether it's during coronavirus or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to add to that, I guess when we're talking about sellers' expectations at this time, we often deal with sellers that are in both positions, buying and selling. So I guess talking about a few different scenarios here. If it's a seller that's buying as well, I think right now in this weird time, we're more likely to suggest selling first than before.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
absolutely.
Absolutely. So, but when they're buying first, we're more likely to really caution them about a conservative expectation on the sale price out of fear that we're in this testy market that could turn 10, 20% at any point in time if it just shifts a bit more. But I think that overall, like when I'm looking at where we're at right now, I see the next few months being flat. I see it being influenced by, I think the fear is going to linger with media headlines still being in the picture and financial markets being up and down. I don't know, Denny. I don't feel that, like, I don't see any evidence of it going upward or downward right now for the types of products that we sell. There's nothing strongly indicating one or the other. So when you're a seller, part of the expectation is if you're buying in this market, it's all relative. So, but sell first, is a little more suggested now due to the uncertainty. But if you're not buying in this market, you're purely selling out of opportunity because it's spring and you're trying to get the best price for your place. I mean, those are that. If more of those come out and flood the market and they want yesterday's price, that's going to. I mean, that's just wasting their time. For certain products,
Totally.
I've looked at. I was looking at the stats yesterday, and the stats for April came out, and it wasn't really indicating upward or downward. It just said demand, like listings and sales both reduced, almost by a similar number. But it was kind of indicating that it was more of a like the sales to active listing ratio. It said this is for all product types, was around 11.8%. So that's kind of towards a buyer's market, so it's a little bit misleading, but what they're not really saying there is there's a lot of overpriced product on the market that's just has no chance of selling or very low chance of selling. So when I isolated like our types of products and I looked at March data, because April, I feel like if we're pulling April sales right now, we're missing out on potentially a week of sales that haven't registered yet. But the March data was so strong, so we're coming off of March that was, here's an example, Denny, townhouses and apartments in March, the sales to listing ratios there. That for townhouses, for the market, like New West, Coquitlam, Port Moody, similar markets that we work into, for $700,000 to $900,000, the sales to listing ratio was 41%.
Wow.
So 41% of townhouses were selling out of the listings in March. And for apartments, condos, for New West, Coquitlam, Port Moody, 2-bedroom condos between $500,000 and $700,000, the sales to listing ratio for March was 34.5%. Wow. So those are sellers markets. And then yet the April data shows completely, the April data shows 12% and 14% for those products. So how do you go from 41 to 12% and 34.5 to 14% in 1 month? It takes a weird market, a COVID experience, and a lot of uncertainty to do that, but also potentially some unregistered sales that haven't processed. And it's just weird times. I don't know where I'm going with this, Denny. I don't know.
Those stats do give me some optimism that once the state of emergency is removed and we start, businesses started opening, people start going back to work, that kind of gives me some optimism that there will be a lot more activity once we get out of this. Again, it's just like difficult to predict how long that's going to take, right? I think Horgan is making an announcement tomorrow on some sort of plan to start reopening businesses. So we'll see what that says. I know some other provinces in Canada have made those announcements, and I think it's like a 3-phase plan of opening businesses based on how essential they are. So we could have a busy summer. I don't see, it would be hard to predict that sale prices will go up. But I think the activity increases quite a bit as soon as there's more confidence out there. One of the things holding a lot of buyers back is just the fear of, well, if this goes on for 3 to 6 months, the market's going to go down because no one is leaving their home and no one is buying homes. So the market's going to go down. I don't want to spend $1 million for a home that in 3 months from now could be worth 900,000. So
Absolutely.
I think once a lot of that fear subsides, I think, like, based on the numbers that we're showing in January, February, early March, I think there is a lot of people that want to make a move.
There's at least a wave of people that are still unsettled that aren't in the homes they want to be in. So I think there's at least going to be that surge. You know, if you're a seller right now and we're having this conversation of whether you should sell now or wait, you know, our answer is often we just don't know. You know, the advantage of selling right now is there's low supply. The advantage of waiting is that there's going to likely be more buyers looking. Once it's, well, that's an assumption, so you can't guarantee that. But when you're talking to a seller that has no strict timeline, that's asking you, should I sell now or wait? What's your suggestion typically? Well, it depends on the product, of course. So let's call it a $1.2 million house in the burbs.
So my conversation with them is supply is extremely low. And we've got one for sale right now in the suburbs of Greater Vancouver that is listed at 1.199. That is by far our busiest listing. And when I say busy, it's 12 to 15 showings a week. And we've had 4 times multiple offers on this thing.
And 12 to 15 showings a week, but how many days on market, roughly?
It's been on market a month and a half.
Yeah.
So like that type of product, there just isn't any others in that neighborhood available. So my conversation with them is, let's discuss the goals. Like, you know, why would you like to sell right now? Do you want to downsize? If we're talking about let's say a 60s, 70s home in a good neighborhood in the suburbs, do you want to downsize? Are you moving out of the city? Are you retiring? Whatever that may be. And my conversation with them is, look, like, there's no pressure from us to accept a low offer. Because the inventory is so low, and based on our experience with this other listing, there's a lot of people out there that want to buy, you know, let's call it quote unquote entry-level family homes in good neighborhoods in the suburbs. So there's no harm in trying it for 30 days. Let's list at where we think the market should be for this based on January, February, early March sales. Try it out for a month. It's going to be active. Are we going to get the exact number that we want? We're not going to know until we've list it. And if they're in no rush, then, you know, we're not accepting an offer that's $1 million for a house that we think is worth 1.2. But if that's the only offer that we get in those 30 days on market, then maybe we decide to take it off and relist when there's a little more buyer confidence. But based on the activity that we're seeing in those types of market segments, I don't think it's a bad time to list. I think low inventory for a seller is a very good thing. And having 15 showings a week for the last 6 weeks is crazy. Even in busy markets, we don't see that activity.
That just shows the low supply and that buyers exist. And I agree with you completely on that testing the market strategy. And we often share that with sellers that aren't in a spot where they have to sell. There is because we're seeing sales, some examples of sales in line with peak pricing or at good prices anyway. That means there's a chance that they could achieve something similar. And if they have a product that is desirable, there's no harm in trying it for 30 days, and there's no commitment after that. Like, you could put it on for May or June, and if it doesn't work out or it slows down, you take it off. And, you know, this particular year, I'd say there's a good chance we're going to have a busy fall this year. So if you're a seller and you're thinking strategically, where you don't want to necessarily have your place in showing condition for the next 6 months and go through an exhausting selling process, one potential approach is, let's give it, say, 30 days in May and June. And if it doesn't work out, let's reassess and let's try it again in September or August. And that's a perfectly fine approach. Now, a little bit of a different suggestion if it's a $4 million home, maybe. I don't know if I'd be saying test it out right now.
For sure, because it totally depends on your market segment, what type of home, what type of product you have. Because that market segment right now is just dead quiet.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, the $3 to $4 million suburb buyer usually has to sell something to buy those homes. And if they're selling something and you list a property early in the year, a lot of the buyers that are interested in your expensive home often aren't in a position to buy it because they haven't sold yet. So more often than not, the higher end listings in the markets that we're working in, we're typically recommending that they go a little bit, at least mid or late busy season, not first one in January in a lot of cases.
There's one other thing I want to mention on this topic before we kind of wrap up. But so we talked about important in slower markets like this for sellers to have patience. There is a potential for buyers to ask for something to try to renegotiate down the road. So the question then comes up is, how do we avoid, or how do we kind of get ahead of the curve and prep buyers that, there are some older aspects of this home, or, just address their concerns prior to even writing the offer. And I think this is good practice for any agent, regardless of what type of market we're in, is to have all this information available and share with buyers as they're coming through the door. But having that conversation really early before you list with the seller of, is there any negatives that you found with your home that we can share to avoid concern? Is there, or to get ahead of the concern, is there any unpermitted renovations that you've done? Is your suite unauthorized? Just sharing all those things. Again, like in slower markets, buyers are more concerned, are more sensitive than they would be in a busy market where they feel pressure that if they don't get in now, the prices are going to rise. So I think addressing all of those concerns prior to an offer on the table could potentially help with, pushing that deal over the finish line and getting them to remove subjects, or not asking for, $10,000 off due to some inspection items that you've already told them are, older aspects of the home.
And so just to be clear, when you're talking about trying to basically put all the information out to the buyer as much as possible, are you talking about it from the buyer's agent side or the listing agent showing the buyer side?
Listing agent. So like one thing that came up recently is unpermitted renovations. So home inspection happens and the home inspector says, I don't think this is to code. I don't think this is permitted. So go through the process of checking with the city, which should be done beforehand anyway. And yes, this part of the renovation was not permitted. So just to understand, a lot of renovations and most basement suites throughout Greater Vancouver are not permitted. So in busy markets, this is something that is easily overlooked by buyers. Whereas in slower markets, unpermitted, buyers are thinking worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is I buy today. Yes, I'm getting a slight discount from, let's say, January, February prices. But if the market goes down another 10%, I'm paying way more today than I would in a couple months from now. So adding the concern, the risk of taking on a home that has unpermitted renovations is just pushing me over the edge and making me say, okay, well, this is too much risk based on all these factors together that I was already concerned about. I'm not going to be moving forward.
I'm on the same page with you. I recently have a subject removal today, Denny, and the house was built in 1893. And it had an extension at some point, but and it has a lot of obstructions to do a proper oil tank scan. And early in the listing, it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom home. What I did is I basically laid it out that there's likely inadequate paperwork to show the extension the permit details or the building details of the extension. It was 20 years ago, and there's nothing really on file other than a permit for a new foundation. So the way that I set it up with the buyer is expect that you would be buying this place not knowing that there's a lot of unpermitted work done, because we're never going to be able to prove that everything that's been done to this home has been done with permits. It's also changed hands a number of times, so expect us to have no paperwork to show who's done the work. So in this particular instance, we're going to heavily rely on the home inspector because we can't have certainty elsewhere. We also can't do a proper oil tank scan because there's too many obstructions around the home, and they have zero paperwork to give us peace of mind that there's an oil tank. So what we can do is just simply have a clause that protects you. But I basically really laid it out right from the start that there's going to be uncertainty the whole way through. You're going to have to sign off on this home with uncertainty, and they particularly on this home want to do an extension. And I basically stated to them, don't expect that extension to be financially feasible. Like you're going to find out, you probably can do that extension, but it's going to, once you find out all the costs, it's not going to be feasible. You're going to find that it's going to be better to just move. So in a sense, I really kind of shut down the fact that they're going to be in a position at subject removal where they're going to have to decide to remove subjects, knowing that they're not going to have confidence of permits, not going to get the extra space that they plan on doing to extend, not going to know for sure that there's an oil tank or not. But I set that up right from the start. And that's how we are today at subject removal with all that information that, that was right from the start. So it helped. But you go through it and you still want to renegotiate the contract at this time because it's an old home. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I hope there's some value out there from this conversation for the realtors listening, but it's just weird.
I guess on the other side, Jamie, though, because I think that's a really good example. And one of the things that you do exceptionally well in our industry is have those conversations early and just educate them on exactly what it means. Like you've been through so many real estate transactions that you know where all the information lies, if it's available. And you get it quickly and share that and educate people on what that means. So if you didn't have those conversations early, if you, didn't pull permit history, if you didn't educate them on, there's an extension, there's no permit for that. The only permit is for this foundation renewal, whatever it may be. But here's what to expect if you purchase this home based on all the information that is available with the city, blah, blah, blah. If you didn't have those conversations, if you were less experienced and found out all of those things later on in the transaction after the accepted offer, on subject removal date, how much more concerned are your buyers, and what is the likelihood much less in terms of removing subjects?
Sorry, what's the question there?
I guess just like what I'm getting at, and the reason I brought up this point of just like being as honest as possible, being as forthcoming as possible with any unpermitted renovations, an unauthorized suite, whatever it may be that could be seen as a negative from a buyer's perspective. So from the buyer's perspective, you having those conversations early, do you think that has like helped them just understand and have time to process what it actually means? And are they more likely to remove subjects compared to not having that conversation early, finding it out from the home inspector on the last day, and then being a little bit terrified because they didn't know that?
Yeah. I think, this has been a great example, Denny, and I appreciate the compliments there on the, for those listening, I'm a bit of a real estate nerd and I have a lot of experience with the construction side. So in terms of, if you're buying a new condo, my secret weapon of knowledge isn't going to help you. But if you're buying a 120-year-old home in New West, I don't know if anyone's more qualified. And what I mean by that, if you're a realtor, one strong suggestion here is go through a significant renovation or a new build and go through the whole permitting process and the engineers and the zoning. Learn the zoning in the neighborhood. Like the example I gave where we're at the subject removal today, I was able to set up basically 90% of the expectations with the buyer right away because I knew the permitting process, I knew the zoning, I knew the rezoning process, I knew the heritage protection for this home, and I knew the sticking point where the costs would get out of control. And so when you know the math on construction and renovations, it's a high value add. When you know when I'm walking into a home with a client, I can give an approximate idea of timeline, what the process would look like, and how much would it cost, and where the sticking points will be. And for this particular home, the sticking point of doing an extension off the top floor for me is that they would be gaining, I believe they have a 0.5 FSR. They'd be getting a 0.7 FSR, which in this case gains 500 or 600 square feet. And my sticking points with that is that I basically said, I don't know if they're going to find a structural engineer that's going to sign off on doing that extra floor on old foundation. So I said that I believe that once they have a structural engineer look at it, one, I don't know if anyone's going to sign off on putting their license on that foundation. And two, if they find one that does, I think they're going to find that the cost, they may have to underpin the foundation, or just the cost of rebuilding it all is going to exceed the value they're adding to the home by a lot. Right. So, if you're a realtor and have no experience with that, you wouldn't be able to set that expectation up. But if you're a realtor and you know the zoning, you know the cost of construction, you know the sticking points in the process and the timeline to do that, and this particular one also involves a rezone to do that, so it'd be an 18-month process. They have to get heritage assessments, everything. If you know that, that's a huge value. And if you know that process, you can set that up right before the offer happens. And in this particular case, I did, and it worked out. And the buyer feels confidence. And so, I don't know. That was a bit of a rant, Denny. I don't know.
No. I think that's a good, and even just like the way that you present the information is not like you're pushing them one way or the other. And one thing I always say to our team, and in conversations with other agents, is our job is not to make decisions for people. Our job is to give them as much information as is available and educate them on what that information will mean for them. Our job is not to say, this is a great deal, you need to buy this house. Our job is to say, if you buy this house, this is what you're buying. So I think the way that you present information is fantastic. And I don't know anyone locally that has the construction knowledge and can educate a buyer on that kind of stuff better in our local markets anyway.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's purely because I've complicated my life with these projects over the years. As you've been a victim of it.
I think complicate is a pretty big understatement there.
Yeah. Let's just build a house while we're having multiple kids and doing everything at once. Yeah, I general contracted a home, a new build myself. I've done a couple significant renovations just to learn and purely to satisfy my interest. And it was the new build was a nightmare. I remember doing insulation on like Christmas, like Boxing Day, and working on the house between Boxing Day and New Year's while I had a newborn at home. So you have to make some sacrifices if you decide to GC a project. But if you do general contract a project, I guarantee you will learn an absolute ton. And I'm so thankful I did it when I did it, because I don't think I have the energy to do that today.
All right, let's wrap up.
Let's wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Agents out there, hopefully there was some information there that you can use in your next conversation with sellers. These are challenging times, but at the same time, there is a lot of opportunity. So hopefully your next conversation, you get even more information than you would have before based on this conversation today.
Yeah. And always be learning. Sit in on those inspections. Learn from renovations, permits. The more you know, the more you can set up your buyer's expectations, knowing that they're nervous at this time.
100%.
Let's close it on that, Denny.
Beautiful.